Strategic plan. Can the president rally support to dismantle the Islamic State? Defending Christians. Religious world leaders ask U.S. lawmakers to help protect persecuted minorities. Social robots. How they're programmed to be more like humans than machines. And papal fever. Posing for selfies with the Pope's likeness ahead of his visit to the Philippines. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 10th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. President Obama addresses the nation tonight, outlining a broad strategy to stop Islamic extremists in Iraq and Syria. The speech comes after meetings this week with congressional leaders seeking bipartisan support for the plan. Wyatt Goolsby reports from the White House tonight. Wyatt?
Brian, the White House says the president will move forward with his strategy with or without formal approval from lawmakers. Part of that wider plan to fight ISIS or the Islamic State will likely include more airstrikes as well as more support for Iraqi security forces on the ground. The president's address to the nation comes as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry began a whirlwind tour of the Middle East today, meeting with partners to join a coalition against the militants. In Iraq, he met with the new prime minister, pledging help to defeat the terrorists.
The United States and the world will simply not stand by and watch as ISIL's evil spreads.
Kerry predicted a coalition of at least 40 nations will eliminate ISIS. Today, the Senate Democratic leader urged Congress to quickly approve the president's request to arm moderate opposition forces in Syria to fight the militants. But some Republicans don't agree with the president's leadership.
All of this underscores something I've been suggesting for some time. The president is a rather reluctant commander-in-chief.
Criticism against the president's handling of ISIS extends beyond current elected officials, with former Vice President Dick Cheney saying the U.S. must take decisive action to stop this current threat.
All that we achieved in protecting the country after 9/11 came from the understanding that terrorists are not just common lawbreakers, and terrorism is not just street crime on a bigger scale.
Both parties say working with regional partners will help defeat ISIS, a point echoed by Matt Smith, president of the Catholic Advocate in Washington. He wants local governments to publicly call out ISIS behavior.
I also think it's important for some of these Muslim nations to step up and publicly denounce these atrocities that are happening in the name of their religion.
Throughout the day, the president has been meeting with national security advisors and other experts behind closed doors. One picture that we did get today was an official White House photo that was pretty interesting. It was inside the White House itself in the Situation Room. President Obama meeting with some of his closest advisors, talking about that wider strategy against ISIS. Again, that's just moments before his speech tonight. One other note tonight we want to bring you with regards to that wider coalition effort. We've learned that France is ready to take part in airstrikes and possibly to supply weapons to Iraq. We learned that France's foreign minister voiced concern today about the wider threat of ISIS against Western nations. Brian?
All right, thank you. Wyatt Goolsby at the White House. Blaise Misztal is the Director of Foreign Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Blaise, how do you think the U.S. should respond to this Islamic State terror threat?
Thanks for having me on. I think the response needs to be twofold. There needs to be a political response and a military one. Politically, we're dealing with two countries that are either already disintegrated or in the process of falling apart, Iraq and Syria, and they need to be patched together somehow. Militarily, this terrorist group needs to be thwarted in its advance and attempt to seize territory and then pushed back out of the countries it's already in.
This is a formidable group, though. How reasonable is it to think that we can dismantle ISIS, and what kind of time are we talking about?
Clearly, it's not something the United States is going to be able to do alone, which is why what Secretary Kerry and Secretary Hagel have been doing over the last week, going around the world and trying to put together a coalition, is so important. How long it takes depends on our goals. If we're merely just trying to stop their advance, that can be done quicker. If we're trying to destroy the group, that's going to take a very long time. Tomorrow is the 13th anniversary of 9/11. Al-Qaeda is still around and still a threat.
Does the U.S. face a threat similar to 9/11 from this group?
Potentially it does. We know that at least about 100 Americans, about 500 or more Europeans are training and fighting with ISIS. Those are terrorists in training that could easily come back to the U.S. and perpetrate attacks here. So the threat could be even bigger than it was for 9/11. However, we know that none of them have tried to come back recently, and obviously our national security and homeland security officials are trying to prevent that from happening.
You heard Senator McConnell say that Obama is a reluctant commander-in-chief. Do you think that he can achieve some bipartisan support for whatever he presents?
I think so. I mean, we've seen the polls indicating that there is broad support among Americans for going after ISIS and for putting together a coalition to do so. And we've heard from lawmakers from both parties that they're willing to support the president's efforts to do so. So I think this is a rare moment that'll be good for the country to band together around this important cause.
Will the president need congressional approval if he decides to take military action?
I don't think he needs congressional approval. As we saw in 2011 in Libya, he's able to prosecute airstrikes and limited operations without congressional approval. Alternatively, the authorization for use of force against al-Qaeda could be argued to be in effect here. What he will need is Congress to give him the money to be able to carry out a protracted military campaign. And I think that sort of support from Congress will also be politically important to show that the country is backing him in whatever he decides to do.
But would a sustained involvement in the Middle East be consistent with the current foreign policy of this administration?
Yes and no. President Obama has been clear that he wants to fight terrorism wherever it is and counter violent extremism. However, he did not think that he would have to do so with quite such a heavy hand. He would clearly be much more preferred to pivot to Asia, as his national defense strategy says he would like to, and nation build at home, as he had said many times. So while this is in line with his goals, the degree to which he has to intervene is not something he might be comfortable with.
From the Bipartisan Policy Center, Blaise Misztal, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Brian.
And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Police say a South Carolina man has confessed to killing 5 children and dumping their bodies in another state. 32-year-old Timothy Ray Jones Jr. will be charged with 5 counts of murder. He was stopped in Mississippi when police say he was acting strangely. That led to the discovery of the children's bodies. Authorities think all 5 children, ages 1 through 8, were killed at the same time, but they say they don't know why or how they were killed. The children's mother is Jones' ex-wife.
I don't think that there's a person in this room that could speak to the mother of these children and not become emotional. I want you to know that she has lost 5 vital body parts. She's a very nice person, a very sweet lady. She is in shock and is extremely distraught.
This terrible case has unfolded over the past 2 weeks. It covers 5 states, about 700 miles in the investigation. Autopsies are scheduled to begin tomorrow. A young Colorado woman pleads guilty today after repeated attempts to wage jihad. Shannon Conley was arrested earlier this year trying to board a flight to Syria. The 19-year-old Islamic convert reportedly hoped to use her nursing skills to aid ISIS fighters. Under Conley's plea deal, she could receive a lighter sentence if she helps identify others who intend to help the Islamic State. Her lawyer says Conley now understands the dangerous nature of ISIS after seeing those 2 American journalists beheaded.
She would like everyone to know that her heart goes out and her prayers go out to those who have lost, those who have been, the families of those who've been killed, and to anyone who has been oppressed by those forces.
Her lawyer also says Conley believes her arrest may have saved her life. Federal authorities say she planned to go to Syria to marry a man she met online who claimed to be an Islamic State fighter. Afghan officials claim 14 people, including civilians, have been killed in a U.S. airstrike in eastern Afghanistan. A spokesman for President Hamid Karzai said on Twitter today that Karzai strongly condemns the U.S. airstrike. A NATO spokesman says the strike killed 1 armed fighter. Accurate casualty counts are often difficult. In the rugged Afghan countryside, civilian deaths have led to quite a bit of friction between Karzai and NATO. Thousands in India and Pakistan are still waiting to be rescued after devastating floods in that region. Nearly 80 Indian military aircraft and crews continue rescue efforts today. The flooding began earlier this month. It's caused landslides submerging parts of Kashmir, a region disputed between India and Pakistan. The Indian government says more than 76,000 people have been rescued so far. Pakistan reports more than 250 deaths in its part of Kashmir. It's the worst flooding this region has seen in a century. 5 donated ambulances from the U.S. will help in the effort to contain the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone in West Africa. It's part of a broader $100 million U.S. response to the crisis. These emergency vehicles could help reduce the time it takes to get care to the patients. The local government says it can sometimes take up to 24 hours to transport those who are sick. A private foundation is also donating $50 million to the cause. That will be used to provide supplies and develop vaccines. So far, the Ebola outbreak has killed more than 2,200 people in West Africa. British politicians hightailed it to Edinburgh today. They're worried by polls showing increasing support for Scotland to split from the United Kingdom. The referendum for Scottish independence takes place in a week, September 18th. Polls suggest the two sides are basically neck and neck, with that gap closing. Prime Minister David Cameron and the heads of rival Labour and Liberal Democrat parties spoke to Scottish audiences today. In a rare display of cross-party unity, they're begging Scots to stick with the Union.
I would be heartbroken if this family of nations that we've put together and that we've done such amazing things together, if this family of nations was torn apart.
I say, don't choose an irreversible separation. Choose to stay together on the basis of those values. Solidarity, social justice, together, not alone. From the head, from the heart, from the soul. Vote no in this referendum and let's change Britain together. Thank you very much.
Making a powerful case, England and Scotland have been united for more than 300 years. Many independent supporters cite Prime Minister Cameron's conservative budget-slashing policies as one reason they want out of the UK. Well, the fallen heroes of the 9/11 attacks are honored on the eve of the 13th anniversary at a special Capitol ceremony today. A congressional gold medal was presented to each of the memorial sites where so many Americans died in the terror attacks. The gold medal is the highest civilian award the U.S. Congress can bestow. One medal will go to the Flight 93 National Memorial in Western Pennsylvania, one to the National September 11 Memorial and Museum in New York, and one to the Pentagon Memorial. Hundreds of items from civil rights icon Rosa Parks will have a new home at the Library of Congress here in Washington for the next 10 years. Howard Buffett, son of billionaire investor Warren Buffett, is loaning the entire collection to the world's largest library. His foundation bought the archive last month, saying the artifacts belong to the American people. The collection includes Parks' Presidential Medal of Freedom and Congressional Gold Medal. The library says some of the Rosa Parks treasures will be included in an exhibit about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which opens next spring. Coming up, some say the cost of higher education has spiraled out of control. Can it be reined in? And the persecution of Christians is the focus of a summit of world leaders here in Washington. On Wednesday, September 10th, thank you for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, as the president lays out his strategy on fighting ISIS, some groups are urging him to address the plight of religious minorities in the region. Jason Calvi reports.
Brian, Christian leaders from the Middle East have traveled thousands of miles to be here at the Capitol. They're telling lawmakers about their persecuted flock back home, and they're asking Congress today for help.
Military intervention with Air Force, it will be, I think, much needed.
His Beatitude Ignatius III is the spiritual leader of some Eastern Rite Catholics in Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and Lebanon. He's one of 5 Middle Eastern patriarchs meeting with leaders on Capitol Hill this week. Congressmen from both parties took to the microphone expressing their support for Christians in the region suffering persecution.
Because they know that when the oppressed and those who are being murdered and are looking out for help, it's the United States of America that people all over the world look to for leadership.
By blood and history, we are all brothers and sisters.
For faith leaders, that message may be comforting, but they say their communities need action.
People in northern Iraq, it's the humanitarian assistance because they are in dire need of human assistance. Many thousands of them, they still live in parks, in, open places.
To ease that suffering, organizers of the visit and lawmakers want Congress to take some concrete steps.
To promote human rights in the Middle East, we should be scrutinizing foreign aid. There should be statements of solidarity.
Nobody celebrates going to war. Nobody celebrates dropping bombs. But there's time where righteous indignation must happen, and this is it.
And today's visit to the Capitol is part of a three-day summit called In Defense of Christians, put together by a group of the same name. They're a new group, and they tell me that they really hope to be a permanent presence here in the Capitol to represent persecuted Christians. Brian?
Thank you. Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Well, today a group of North Dakota college students had front row seats for Pope Francis's Wednesday audience. 23 students from the University of Mary in Bismarck got up very early today and arrived for this weekly event in St. Peter's Square. Those seats are first come, first served, by the way, and they say the long wait was worth it.
It was absolutely incredible. We were within feet of the Pope, and he was driving by, and our group was loud enough at one point where he looked and he waved to us, and it was pretty awesome.
The students are spending their fall semester in Rome. The Vatican estimates 50,000 people attended today's audience. The Holy Father has named 2 respected American canon lawyers to key Vatican positions. Jesuit Father Robert Geisinger will be the Vatican's point man on abuse at the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. That office handles serious violations of canon law, including clergy sex abuse charges. Monsignor Robert Oliver, who leaves that post, will serve on a commission Francis created to protect children from abuse. Monsignor Oliver tells EWTN News Nightly, child protection is a high priority for the Pope, and the Church is taking action. One of Pope Francis's closest advisors spoke in Washington last night on the Holy Father's call to reach out to others. Boston's Cardinal Sean O'Malley spoke to a packed auditorium in DC's Museum. The John Carroll Society hosted the Pope Francis and the new Evangelization event. Cardinal O'Malley underlined the Pope's call for love and mercy to open the hearts of others. He told EWTN News Nightly why this can be difficult in our modern culture.
Well, people have forgotten about God, and they've made other gods of power, money, pleasure, and so we have to reintroduce them to the joy of the gospel.
Cardinal O'Malley went on to say we have to express the gospel in a way people can understand. He is the only American member of Pope Francis's Gang of 9, the Council of Cardinals who advise the Holy Father. He is also the president of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. Well, he posed for selfies with young people, so Pope Francis would probably appreciate this. Catholics in the Philippines are posing with a life-size image of Francis ahead of his visit in January. A church-run radio station in the Philippines is distributing cardboard cutouts of the Pope. Selfie-loving Filipinos are already catching papal fever, taking pictures with the cutout at a shopping mall. Some shoppers say they're surprised to see how real it looks. Others say they hope to see the Pope in person when he visits the islands early next year. Up next, we'll meet social robots that interact with humans and may soon have a sense of touch. And you can't afford not to have a college degree, but can you afford to get one? Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday evening on EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. We're going to talk about education a little bit, some new figures that the College Board has put out. Federal student aid jumped from $35 million to more than $176, that's $35 billion with a B, to more than $176 billion between 1981 and 2012. Now, federal grants increased from $17 billion to $47 billion during the same period. So clearly, there's a jump here. Richard Vedder, director of the Center for College Affordability and Productivity, is joining us now. In your view, Richard, where is the burden for these higher costs of college education being carried?
Well, a large part of the burden is being carried by the students themselves. The students are ending up paying much higher tuition levels than they were 20, 30 years ago, in spite of all this federal aid. And indeed, I would argue the federal aid is one of the reasons why the cost of college has gone up.
Why would you argue that? Why is that fueling this rise?
Well, the government gives money to kids to go to school. the schools say, these kids got all this money they didn't used to have, so we'll just jack up the price of college a little bit. So that's what they're doing. And there's quite a bit of evidence to support it.
So these loans are available to people regardless of need or income. Who benefits most from these student loans right now?
I hate to say this because I'm a college professor, but I think those of us in the university communities themselves have benefited, because as tuition fees have gone up, as these kids have gotten this extra money, the universities have more money. And what do they do with it? Well, they hire more administrators, fancy facilities for the students, lower teaching loads for people like me who teach, bigger salaries, million-dollar university presidents, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just that, but a lot of the benefits of all of this student loan, the money has gone more to the colleges than to the kids in the final analysis.
And there seem to be a lot more colleges out there. A lot of them are positioning themselves along interstates, very visible, marketing their wares. Studies show that earnings have kept pace or continue to exceed the rising cost of college. So what's the problem?
Well, that's true for some people. But there's a lot of people, 40% of the kids who enter college don't even graduate. They don't even graduate, and they have loans. The bottom quarter of the college classes, the kids in the bottom quarter, a recent Federal Reserve study show, earn about the same as high school graduates. Now, this is just the lower kids who do poorly in college, the ones at the bottom who graduate but do poorly. So about half the kids that go to college are disappointed. They either don't graduate or they end up working at a fast food place or in retail trade.
And so many have to go on to grad school to get anywhere in a career. Should the government be offering aid for grad school?
I think that's an interesting question. I think we ought to re-examine that, whether a person should have the right to borrow money from the government forever, I mean for 8 or 10 years to go to school, when they are the primary beneficiary.
Richard Vedder, Director of Center for College Affordability and Productivity. Very interesting topic. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Glad to be with you, Brian.
Well, robots, once considered futuristic, are becoming mainstream. As Catherine Elliott reports tonight, some of these machines can now engage humans.
Meet Isaac. This is Bottler. This is Jibo.
The world's first family robot.
Each is a social robot designed to interact with humans.
Social robots really interact with people in a way that feels much more like you're interacting with a someone rather than a something.
And sophisticated robots like Isaac, being developed at the Naval Research Laboratory, can assess the world around them.
The field is actually called cognitive robotics, where we model certain processes that humans have that give us cognitive abilities.
Isaac has an uncanny sense of situational awareness. He has cameras for eyes, a range sensor, and scores of motors to mimic human movement.
So what's important is that it has a lot of features that help support research in how humans are going to work with robots.
The makers of Bottler say it's designed to perform a specific function, delivery of small items to hotel guests.
We call it a service robot, but it's social in the sense that it's designed to be in human spaces and interact with people and around people. So it interacts with the front desk agent when they're sending it somewhere. It interacts with people on the elevator as it's going along, and it interacts with people at the door when the delivery arrives.
Jibo, on the other hand, is stationary, but is being promoted as a family's personal helper by reading stories to children, posting reminders, even taking pictures of family events.
It's not a technology that is ever trying to replace or compete with our human relationships or even our relationships with companion animals and other sorts of things we enjoy.
Jibo is expected to be available next year. But even as social robots explode on the scene, researchers acknowledge they have limitations, and it's important to manage human expectations.
Perception is really one of the hard areas in robotics, and to be social in the world, you have to be able to interpret the scene around you.
Next, researchers are working on a sense of touch for Isaac and others like him, thus giving social robots a growing spectrum of activities to interact with people. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Hopefully they're not more sociable than humans. Well, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for watching. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch on YouTube anytime you like. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching. Good night, and God bless you.